Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of Tech Talk with Ethan. And today I'm joined by Jaymi Lee Smith, who is a professional lighting designer. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
No problem. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. So I've been a lighting designer for the last 25, 30 years. And I primarily design at large regional theaters around the country. And then I have been teaching at UC Irvine. I teach in the graduate program for lighting design, and I've been there for the last 14 years.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of time spent in technical theater.
It has, yeah, absolutely.
What sparked your interest in lighting design?
It's funny. I got into tech theater because I got in trouble in homeroom in 7th grade, and my detention was to work on tech crew for a production of The Boyfriend. And I feel like, I kind of stayed in detention. I fell in love with it. And so I actually started in scenic design primarily, and I grew up in Indianapolis, and I became the resident scenic designer at a theater company, a professional theater company in Indiana when I was 15. And they asked me one day if I could do lighting, and I lied, and I said, yes, of course I can. And then I'd wait till everyone left the building, and I would climb up like these giant scary ladders by myself and hang a Fresnel and see what it did, and shock myself a few times, plugging things in wrong. I fell in love with that. Yeah.
That's really interesting how it's so in detention. Like, you would never think that, detention. I mean, what? So at that school, I guess they had a tech theater program or stage crew.
Yeah, it was a small private school, and so they had a tech theater, program of sorts, not like they have now in like these giant programs in high schools. But I took all of the courses, and by the time I had finished taking all the tech theater courses, they didn't have any left for me, so they made me then start teaching like the 7th and 8th grade theater classes as a way to so it was a little bit of a loop around. So yeah that's really interesting. I mean, see, you'd think there'd be enough classes, right? There's 4 years of middle school, or 3 years of middle school, right? And high school, you advance that. Yeah, but and also at the time, I feel like tech theater has really exponentially grown over the last 20 years, and so there's a lot more of those offerings now than there were then in the middle of Indiana.
Yeah, exactly. Could you talk about could you talk about the process of line design and how you do line design?
Absolutely. So as a lighting designer, so it is, we all have a slightly different process, right? But lighting is very difficult to talk about, right? It's this kind of ethereal thing. We can't touch it. Most people can't talk about it, right? Like, what are the qualities of light in the room you're in right now? People have a very hard time discussing that. And so a lot of it is about how do we clearly communicate with our team and with the director. And so it starts with getting hired, and then I like to be a creative designer versus reactive, which means that there are some lighting designers that will walk in and they won't have an idea about the lighting until the set's been designed or the director tells them what to do. And I prefer to walk in with a point of view and to hand some things out at that first design meeting to say, like, here's my view of how the lighting can help tell the story for the play. And then as designers, we kind of, we figure out as a group, what is the world of the play? What does it look like? How does it react? And we revise our kind of, concepts based off of that. And then not with every show, but with many shows, if it's complicated, I'll write a very extensive script treatment that talks in language about what am I doing in every scene, right? How am I working with light? Here's some images. And that's to clarify expectations, and it also builds a roadmap for me of what I'm going to do as a lighting designer. And so, and I could say that, like, as a lighting designer, right, I think there's 5 main goals, and that's to illuminate people so we can see them. Yeah. To create atmosphere, right? An atmosphere can be like, kind of locational cues as to where are we, Are we in a jail cell? Are we in a romantic restaurant? But also, is it a dark and stormy night? Is it, cold and alienating? To sculpt people, right? We don't want to, it's not two-dimensional screen. We want to make people and scenery look sculptural. To create movement, and that is kind of, what's that movement from cue to cue, or what's the overall movement of the play as a whole? And then selectivity. And the lighting designer is basically, we're the camera. We help the audience know where to see and what to look at and what's important. And so we are helping to focus them in. And so as a lighting designer, kind of in going through the process, I have to think of all 5 of those goals. And how do I achieve that while also working with the rest of the design team to create a style and world for the play and to help aid the storytelling.
And those things are all very important in your role as line designer to, make sure people can see, right? All those things you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And it's, choosing color and angle and, it's all of those things that I use to help tell that story with light, to help, we talk about the lighting designer painting with light, and it's absolutely what we do. It's
still an art form in a way, right? Because, you get to be creative and make decisions about, the way it looks and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that, my mom wrote children's books for a living, and my dad ran research and development for AT&T. And so, and I am the product of both of them, with both of, the left brain and the right brain. And what I love about light design is it's like this mashup of physics and art at the same time. And so you're dealing with photometrics and kind of electricity and problem solving but you're painting. And so I think it's really fantastic for those that have this left brain, right brain dichotomy and need both of those brains fed.
Yeah. You teach at UC Irvine, as you mentioned. Could you explain that program at UC Irvine?
Absolutely. So it is primarily the graduate program. So it's a three-year MFA program, and we bring in 2 lighting designers a year. And so it's a very intimate program, and we are training in a variety of things, right? It is clear communication, which includes, talking clearly about intent and concept and how you're helping to tell the story, but also light plots are a form of communication. Your paperwork is a form of communication. So teaching that, 3D rendering skills, pre-visualization skills, and just, training your eye to how do you see that there's more green in that color, and why you need to switch something, and so on and so forth. And we do have many undergraduates that are also involved. We are the undergraduate program is a regular BA, and so people don't necessarily focus on one thing, but we'll get a handful of undergraduate lighters that will come and become a really essential part of our program as a whole.
That's great. And so you said you have guest speakers come in, or line designers come in and talk to the students.
We do, yeah. So we have, so there's 2 of us that teach most of the lighting design courses, but we do have adjuncts that sometimes come in. And we also have something called a colloquium where for all the design students, where it's kind of our version of Inside the Actors Studio, where we invite different professionals to come in and to talk about the different industries, because that's also the thing with lighting, is that it has exponentially grown so big that there are so many different industries to go into. And that's, I think, one of the things that we pride ourselves on with our program at UC Irvine, is that we firmly train students in lighting design for theater, because that's where you learn kind of the storytelling and train your eye. We also train for architectural and theme parks and concerts and, live TV events and so on and so forth, because there's so many places that people need a lighting designer now.
Yeah, exactly. And those are also very important, like in theater, of course. Definitely. Well, I mean, we're in a pandemic, as we all know, right? How's your job been affected by this pandemic?
Well, my last show I opened just over a year ago, and that was She Loves Me at South Coast Repertory. And so I miss theater. I miss turning lights on, and I worry that, I probably won't do a show until next fall. And so I hope I remember how to do it. Um, but I miss doing it. I miss my colleagues. I miss the brainstorming. I miss being in the room. And as far as teaching, we've tried to do a pretty hard pivot, and instead of trying to simply have the design students work on Zoom productions, we instead have pivoted them towards things like installation art and interactive technology and immersive theater and things like VR, because we are instead asking, what is the theater of the future going to look like, and how can we help you learn skills to aid you in that future technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've tried some online productions. How can you do lighting in those situations, or how does that work?
Not well. I mean, you can do a little bit, right? But it is the nuance of what we are trying to train our students to do, especially the graduate level, isn't there. So, if you want realistic, naturalistic looking light, right? You're talking about a key source and some bounce, and so you need 3 lights, right? You need like a diagonal back, a key source, and then soft bounce light. If you're doing something, we did do a really cool production of She Kills Monsters, and you can use things like LEDs, and there's some programs out there that will let you remotely control them. But again, like the nuance of it isn't there, right? And you're dealing with 4 or 5 lights instead of 300 lights.
Yeah, way smaller scale than what you're used to with big proscenium arches and all that.
Yeah, and my grad students have done those like tiny little shows, and what they are hoping for is something of more complexity. So we've also been using Vision a lot, which is it's a pre-visualization program from Vectorworks in combo with ETC, and so that lets us create different cue structures and lighting in kind of a 3D environment, so that we can look at, for instance, like we're at a musical class looking at cue structure, right? And because a musical takes it is hard to do a musical and to figure out where to put a cue and where not to put a cue. And so while the previs software doesn't necessarily show us all the nuances, we can look at that kind of cue structure instead.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of softwares, could you explain some of the softwares line designers use?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest ones is in using some kind of computer drafting. And so the standard typically for lighting designers and theater is Vectorworks Spotlight. And we use that because it has kind of the easiest learning curve to it, as well as the plugins are already there within the Spotlight program. So for instance, if you want to draw a lighting instrument, they're already embedded into the program.
Okay.
AutoCAD is also used. It is a little bit more complicated. It is a far bigger program, and it is more expensive. And it is used by a lot of different industries. And so people use that as well. But one of those 2 programs is typically what we use. And then there's a program called Lightwrite, which is it's like a really fancy Excel spreadsheet that we use to organize all of the different numbers that go with lighting, right? Like instrument number and wattage and type of light and all of that. Mm-hmm. And that, for instance, will merge like with Vectorworks with our computer drafting, so that you can have this kind of seamless workflow that goes with it. And then there are the control consoles, right? Of like, how do you tell a light what to do at any given time? And so there's a number of different control consoles that we use to do that. And they are, specialized lighting boards that are used versus, most of the time, versus used like a PC or a Mac. Okay,
yeah. Makes sense. Speaking of lighting consoles, is there a favorite lighting console you've used when designing?
Yeah, I prefer ETC. I think most theatrical designers will. So that's the same for electronic theater controls. They're the same company that made the Source 4 that most people use as a lighting instrument these days. And I really prefer using the the Ion or the EOS.
Well, and there's a lot of different versions, right, of those consoles.
There are, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will take, the best and newest, and I've been lucky enough to be a beta tester on some of their upgrades, and
nice.
I'm a big fan of the color picker, so I can really dial in, especially with different brands of LEDs, like what color I want. But they, light boards have drastically changed from when I started, when it was still manual control on a 2-scene preset board or giant levers. So you can never push, on those old ones, there was no undo button like there is now.
Okay,
so
yeah.
you would make a mistake and you couldn't hit undo. So it's nice to have all these like really valuable tools at hand now.
Yeah, well, it's crazy how far we've come, right? From, like you said, big, lever, right, to, boards that are digital.
Totally, yeah. It's amazing. I teach actually this lighting history course to my grad students because I totally geek out on lighting history and kind of the, all of the people that tried to figure out what light is. And so I go into also a history of kind of like the consoles and the dimmers and the technology that people used to use. And we've come a long way. It used to be like vats of salt water, and which are extremely dangerous, and people lowering, electrodes into it, which also caused a bad gas that they'd inhale. There was risk of electricity, and that used to be, a form of dimming. So we've come a long way.
That's really interesting. I mean, line history can go that. How far back does it go? Like, when did the first light, or when did that come about?
Hey, I mean, you could talk. You could go back to cavemen and Plato's analogy of the cave, right? We usually start talking about it in terms of the Greeks, because they would plan out their plays so that you would, if Act 1 is supposed to happen during daylight hours, you would come and watch that act then. And if Act 2 is supposed to happen at night, then you would go away and have dinner and come. But once it became nighttime, you'd come back and watch it. Yeah. Or create, painting lighting into, like if there was supposed to be lightning, for instance, right? They'd have these black drops that would come down with lightning painted on it. And so, it goes way back, right? And there are lots of different ways to think about it. It took off, of course, kind of during the era of gas lighting, and then into electricity.
It's technology, right? Like it can be wonderful, right? Because we have all these tools, or especially in theater, right? Like all these tools that we can use to, make a show happen, right?
Absolutely. And it's amazing the tools that we have, and it's also amazing when you figure out the tools you need. Right? I think the well-crafted play actually doesn't need me. And those are, in some ways, the play I want to work on, right? Because then I can only add to it versus trying to make up for it. Because I worked on plenty of those shows where the text isn't that great, so we're trying to distract them by making it look really cool. And, as a designer, yes, I like using lots of moving lights and lots of strobes, and that is fun. But I prefer being part of something bigger that lands and is a good story.
Yeah. That's all. In your case, is it common for you to design the lights for the show, right, and run the show, or do you usually design and then leave?
I design and then leave because everything is put into Lightboard, to the lighting console and programmed, and I don't even touch the Lightboard during my career anymore. It's, I'm on headset and I have a programmer up in the booth typing it all in. And then once the show opens, it is the Lightboard operator and the stage manager really take it from there. So I leave before, at opening or sometimes right before opening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I worked a show one time that the line designer ran the show because they had no one else, but that doesn't seem that's on occasion.
Oh, well, and, early in my career, I certainly did that, right? Early in my career, I did all of the jobs. I've been fortunate enough to move up to where I don't have to do that anymore. But when you start out off, you're hanging your own lights and focusing them and cabling them and, running the board yourself. And, I have done a lot of different things in theater on the kind of the way up the ladder.
Exactly. Well, and how would you say, like, for young students to get into the industry, how would one go about that?
Well, Well, I mean, I think that the high schools right now offer so many different opportunities. So I'd say start there, right? And you aren't going to discover, what part of tech theater you like until you start doing it. So try out all the different areas of it. And if you fall in love with it, reach out to your community, see what else you can start doing. You'd be surprised how much help some of those kind of community organizations need. And then look at different programs. I went the route of getting a BFA because at 18, I was convinced that I wanted to be a lighting designer. And I was 100% sure. That is one way of doing it. But it is, usually those are conservatory programs. And so you get really locked into just doing that. Or you can go get a BA and get kind of a more generalized education where you're learning about world history or psychology or all of those, also learning about a wide variety of theater, and then go get a master's degree after that, which is something I'm more of an advocate of, because I think that you get a more well-rounded, educated person when you don't specialize that much as an undergrad. And also just don't be scared to ask people if you can help them. I think that's the biggest thing. The worst thing that anyone can say is no. But I know that in my undergrad, by the time I left, I'd done 50 shows, and only some of those were within my college, and the rest of those were me just, being kind of scrappy and saying, can I do the show? Can I do this show? And some of those shows meant I was literally taking a headlight and a coffee can to make a lighting instrument and putting them up. And that, that's a step, right? There's a step to take to keep learning how to sculpt with light. But it is really about showing up on time and doing what you say you're going to do, having integrity, and, being willing to collaborate and to be a good person, and to be willing to be wrong. It's a big step of being a good collaborator. And, most of the way you make jobs in this industry is through networks. I don't interview for jobs anymore. I get hired because of people that know me. And so that is what your career turns into. And those people I could track all the way back to me being, 17, 18 years old and getting my first shows in Chicago. And so, you have to keep, creating and then maintaining that network of people.
So basically it sounds like build a name for yourself, right? So you have, build a good reputation. Then, once you get to your point, people will hire you and be like, oh, I heard, Jaymi did this, or, she did this. And then you have,
And, and I can say that early on in my career, I created some really hideously ugly designs, as I was still learning how to do it. But I kept getting hired because I was willing to be wrong, and I showed up and I said, great, I will be here and I will do this, and I would do those things. And, I was willing to be a good collaborator. People wanted to be in the room with me. And so that is such a big part of it.
Would you say in gain? So you said you got a BFA, right, in lighting design. Would you say there's a route gain a BFA or a different would be better in gain jobs, or would you say
I think that these days, the world of design has opened up so much more and that the technology has grown so much, but you still need the old stuff as much as you need the new stuff. And so I think that I think it's worth getting the BA as an undergrad and then going to grad school, because then you get all the knowledge. You become a wholer person by getting all this other knowledge with the BA, and then you have this time as a grad student to really focus on the things you don't know and to learn all of that extra technology that has come into being. And so, and I think that it is hard to. I think I'm the last generation where you could kind of really work your way up through the ranks as a designer. And I think it is now, you need the BFA in order to compete with your peers.
Yeah, so at least a BFA, and then if you want to go farther, that's up to you.
Yeah. Yeah, but you need an MFA.
Okay,
After,
yeah,
if
okay.
you're in a BA, you need the MFA as a lighting designer. You can do it with just a BFA, but like you need that time to really focus on purely design. So one route or the other, but I don't think that getting just a BA at this point, you would learn enough to be able to kind of go out on your own as a designer.
Okay, makes sense. If you could go back to high school and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Have faith in myself, right? I think we sabotage ourselves so easily and doubting ourselves. And I think, just having faith and taking that leap is incredibly valuable.
I can't agree more. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jaymi. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. See you guys next week on Tech Talk with Ethan. Bye, guys.